Only 6 months after that, John has forced to abandon his position as a super soldier within the United Earth government. He was being tracked down by the fighting Osiris. He thought he lost them somewhere in like 20 light years from Earth, but he was easily tracked down by them, and he tried to avoid them, but he had forced a battle against them, but it demanded him to stand down or, or be boarded. But he refused, and he was about to enter slipstream space. The fire team Osiris fired at him, and they managed to fire at his ship's engines. But he entered the slipstream space, and they thought that unstable out of his engines would cause the ship to explode. But it didn't. In fact, it would cause some sort of explosion, but not as much as our ship being destroyed. Like a big bright light, and then suddenly his ship was gone. The fighting's Osiris reported back to Earth about his report, but they were demanded to search an area and even around a few light years away, just in case if his ship managed to survive the trip through the stream and even was unharmed. They searched for him for about several hours. They even had support from other ships in the area, but no one didn't find anything, not even a trace. It's like not even wreckage of his ship. It was like he had been just vanished. What if some of the people and some experts believed that his ship had been completely vaporized? That meant no traces of his ship, not even a wreckage. And that was the only official the answer they could come up with. But that was not the case, because after that John's ship entered the slipstream space, and just only a few seconds later it entered, and he were actually very close to a planet, and it crashed on the surface outside of a big town, and he was unconscious. After that, the next day, he woke he woken up and found that he was in a deep forest, and he had no idea where he was, in which planet it was, but he didn't take any chances. He left his ship and tried to figure out if the ship could be restored. He tried to leave the planet once again, but the ship didn't answer, didn't respond, until it showed the engines were damaged. So damaged they couldn't even start. So he was forced to leave the ship and look at it, and it was damaged beyond repair. So he decided to make a scout around the area. He scouted almost like 3 miles, but no signs of any civilization or anything. But he decided to make he did remember he saw ocean in one direction, so he decided maybe to go there, and maybe perhaps he could find something to maybe figure out where he was ending up. But when he get close, he saw buildings in the distance. He saw a city, but the city was not unlike that I had seen before. But he did not enter so deeply into the city, only to this old warehouses or other old buildings that apparently was abandoned. But he managed to track down in the city until he saw some people. He saw humans. He saw humans. So he thought, could this be one of the colonies in the inner or other colonies? But he did not take any risk of being spotted. But he managed to get back to his ship. But the ship itself could not give him much answer to what he was. So he took the big risk. He took off his suit and put on some civilian clothes that he had, and entered the city. As he walked around on the streets, He saw that the city was very unlike that he had ever seen. At least the sky was blue as normal, but he saw cars, and there hasn't been any cars on any of the colonies as long as he can remember. So could this have been a very old colony that has perhaps not been followed the rest of the development of the colonies? It is a possibility, he thought to himself. But he didn't see any signs of military presence. And but when he found a newspaper, it was written in Japanese. So he thought maybe this could have been an ancient Asian descent colony. But what the paper said, the year was only 2012, 2020, and it was located in Japan. It was very so strange. How can he be on Earth? But that meant he had been traveled back in time. But how that's even possible, he thought himself. As he was walking, he walked into someone and he apologized. And he saw there was a young woman, but and she said that was okay. Then she just walked by her, walked by him. He looked after her and saw that she was quite beautiful. But he tried to figure out to stop thinking about her and focus on what used to happen. But for the next couple of days, after he figured out maybe that he was in fact had traveled back in time, but what will he do? The ship cannot take him back to the future, or the ship cannot fly anymore, so what will he do? After figuring out that, he found one of those old abandoned warehouses where he took the ship. At least he thought maybe he could bring the ship there, but it was too heavy, and he had no idea how to bring it there. The only thing he could do was to self-destruct the ship completely, leaving no traces of him in the past. Since the ultimate rule about time travel, you never do all interfere with the development of the society, and not most of all change the timeline. So he somehow self-destruct the ship and it vaporized itself, and now he was stuck in the past. But he had no idea where to go. He had no money, no friends, no family. So what will he do? He thought to himself, now he was in the past. The fire team of Cyrus probably thinks that he is dead in the future. And that they were unable to, even they probably would never figure out that he traveled back in the past. And especially on Earth. So he thought, he has no worries to be thinking about or worried about if he'd be discovered. So he decided to take one of those old abandoned complexes, or at least some sort of apartment building just nearby where he were. There were a few people living there already, but he thought maybe he could use one room for himself. But he didn't like to stay there, so he left the building already the next day. He tried to figure out where he could stay though, since he had no money, and he tried maybe figure out where if he could find a job or something. He found a newspaper the same day and looked through the ads and find there was a school that needed or someone who can train in martial art. They needed some martial art instructor or perhaps even a gym instructor. He thought maybe a martial art training instructor could be more better. So he went there and he showed his martial art skills among the students, and he was hired right away. Now he has had to get a job, and now after several days he managed to get paid for that. From the pay he did get, he managed to find a small apartment not so far from his work. But as he moved in, he ran into someone again, and it in fact was the same young woman that he saw about several days earlier. They were apparently neighbors, and she introduced herself as Uzume, and he introduced himself as John. They became good friends after the first meeting, and they were actually quite good, cool, good friends. They sometimes he actually went to her apartment for chatting, talking, whatever they did. But one day when he was off work, we were just walking around in town and saw Uzume in a different outfit. She was fighting against some robbers or something, but some attackers, some who attacked a young other woman. And he saw her, and he saw him, and that was the surprise to her. After that, he just went back home, and when she came back home, she knocked on his door, and she asked if he could come in and they could talk. And he said yes. There were a lot of things that he needed to explain to her. And from what he could tell, well, it was told by her that she was an alien. And for a reason, he didn't felt much any wrong about that. And he wanted to tell her something himself. After that, she had complained, said that she was an alien and that she was called by the name Sekare, and she had this power by using veils as to block attacks or something, attack people. But then he explained that himself that he was not from this particular place himself. In fact, he was born on another planet himself. He would say he could have been like an alien himself. But this planet was a human colony, and that he was born in the year 2511. But he arrived to Earth again, but from the year 2558. So he had traveled 538 years in the past. And she was the best surprise, but if there was anything that could prove it, he actually kept one evidence, a hologram. A small hologram projector that can be held in your hand, showing him and someone who is trained and some of his close friends who were also soldiers. And that proving her there was enough evidence. But he promised to not he asked her not to tell anyone about his path or about his secret. Because if they were to find out, people probably would ask him more about the future, how the people how the society is in the future, what was happening in the past, and like in the future, all kinds of things. And she promised. But that thing brought them even closer as friends. But for the next 2 years, things did actually start changing though. They actually started to dating. It happened after that John then asked if Uzume probably wanted to go out for had something to eat. And she said yes. So they start dating after that, and both of them had this great time. They often went to the movies, or just at the park, or just having a dinner either at his place or her place. But after they had been dating for the past 3 years now, they decided to live together. So John moved in with Usumi. Usumi and John were very happy together, but there were some problems that happened later on though. It turned out one of Usumi's ex-boyfriends, or at least some a guy that she dated only a year before she met John, came back, wanted to ask her if they could move, if they could go, went back together. But when he saw John answer the door, he was like surprised to see him. But then Usumi walked up beside John and told us that she was sorry, but she was only taken. The guy told her that he felt sorry and he wished her the best of his heart, and then he left. Sometimes later after that, Asumi's friends were having a party, but John he doesn't even want to go to the party. But he told Asumi that she can go if she wanted to. After all, John wasn't feeling so well. He has huge headache going on, so he was going to just lie down. So he did. But even after all this happened, things between John and Asumi only went perfectly well between them. They barely had any fights. They just enjoyed each other's company. They had one argument, but they were only one time when what they were going to do from a date. Like she wanted to go out for the movies, but he wanted to stay at home. For he wasn't feeling so well, but they discussed about what to do. But he promised to take her to the movies the next Friday. So they went on that day. But after that, very much no more much problem, no much fights after between that. There were some discussion among Asumi's friends to John, like if he perhaps would marry her at some point. He said that he probably would do that, but he was not much into the idea at the moment, since they hadn't been dating that long and they hadn't been living together for long either. But he said that he wanted to, at some point, maybe one day, to marry her. And after they had been dating for about 4 years, both of them decided to go on a trip. But when they came back, something was a bit off. They were very happy, and it turned out on this trip, John actually proposed to Asumi. That really surprised them both, all of them, their friends. But they had actually their wedding about a month later of a traditional Japanese wedding. And they even went on a road trip as for their wedding. But there was something that on Asumi's mind after they came back. She wanted to have a family, but John said that he wanted to wait maybe 1 or 2 years just before she settled in as married, which she agreed. And then, only about 3 years later, Asumi announced to all her friends and even to John, who was clueless about this, that she was pregnant with the first baby, and he was super excited. And a few months later, they actually had a boy, and they named him John Jr. John and Azumi spent so much to get time together with their son, and they both were so overjoyed to have a family of them together. Even if it happened that John sometimes missed his time in the future, but he decided it was maybe the best just forget about that past and move on in front of the future. Try to make sure that his son has a very good childhood and that he has a great future as well. But it later turned out for John, though, when he figured out that in fact he not only had traveled back in the past, he had managed to figure out that he had traveled not only to the different in time, but also in the different dimension or another parallel universe. So that the Earth he crash landed on was not the same Earth that he had been on. So he was very surprised about that. But that didn't stop his that he didn't, it didn't stop his feelings forward his family and everything. In fact, that didn't bother him at all. As long as he's happy with his family, and he was still just happy. Even Asumi was just excited to have a family with John. And that's how John and Asumi found a true love and got a family together. The end.